The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. Chapter 10. The Bean Trees. Even a spotted pig looks black at night. This is another thing Mama used to tell me quite often. It means that things always look different and usually better in the morning. And they did. Maddie called first thing to say that Esperanza was going to be all right. They hadn't pumped her stomach after all, because she hadn't taken enough to do much harm. I made Estevan a big breakfast, eggs scrambled with tomatoes and peppers and green chili sauce, and sent him home before I could start falling in love with him again over the breakfast dishes. Turtle woke up in one of those sweet, eye-rubbing moods that kids must know by instinct as a means of saving the human species from extinction. Luann came home from the Ruiz family reunion singing La Bamba. It's surprising, considering Roosevelt Park, but we always heard birds in the morning. There must be transients in the bird world, too, rumple-feathered outcasts that naturally seek out each other's company in inferior and dying trees. In any case, there were lots of them. There was a type of woodpecker that said, "Ha, ha, ha, to hell with you." I swear it did. And another one, a little pigeony-looking bird, said, "Hip, hip, hurroo." Luann insisted that it was saying, "Who cooks for who?" She said she had read it in a magazine. I had a hard time imagining what kind of magazine would go into something like that, but I wasn't about to argue. It was the first time I could remember her hanging on to her own opinion about something, Luann not normally being inclined in that direction. One time in a restaurant, she'd once told me, a waiter mistakenly brought her somebody else's dinner, and she just ate it, rather than make trouble. It was beef shingles on toast. Gradually, Luann and I were changing the house around, filling in the empty spaces left behind by Angel with ABC books and high chairs and diaper totes and all manner of toys, all larger than a golf ball. I had bought Turtle a real bed, junior size, from New to You. We turned the screen porch in the back into a playroom for the kids. Not that Dwayne Ray did any serious playing yet, but he liked to sit out there strapped in his car seat watching Turtle plant her cars in flower pots. The fire engine she called Domato, whereas the orange car was Carrot. Or sometimes she called it Tutu, which is what I had named my Volkswagen, after the man who profited from my rocker arm disaster. I had considered putting Turtle's bed out there on the porch, too, but Luann said it wouldn't be safe, that someone might come along and slash the screen and kidnap her before you could say Jack Robinson. I never would have thought of that. But it didn't matter. The house was old and roomy. There was plenty of space for Turtle's bed in my room. It was the type of house they called a rambling bungalow. The term reminded me somehow of Elvis Presley movies, with wainscoting and steam radiators and about 50 coats of paint on the door frames so that you could use your thumbnail to scrape out a history of all the house's tenants as far back as the 60s, when people were fond of painting their woodwork apple green and royal blue. The ceilings were so high you just learned to live with the cobwebs. It wasn't unreasonably hot yet, and the kids were bouncing around the house like super balls. This was mainly Turtle, with Dwayne Ray's participation being mainly vocal. So we took them out to sit under the arbor for a while. The wisteria vines were a week or two past full bloom, but the bees and the perfume still hung thick in the air overhead, giving it a sweet purplish hue. If you ignored the rest of the park, you could imagine this was a special little heaven for people who had lived their whole lives without fear of bees. Luann was full of gossip from her weekend with the Ruiz cousins. Apparently most of them spoke English. All the men were good-looking and loved to dance, and all the women had children Dwayne Ray's age. She had about decided that every single one of them was nicer than Angel, a conclusion to which they all heartily agreed, even Angel's mother. A large portion of the flock were preparing to move to San Diego. "I can't believe it," she said. "First Manny and Ramona, you remember, the friends I told you about that saw the meteor shower? And now 2 of Angel's brothers and their wives and kids. You'd think they'd discovered gold out there. Angel used to always talk about moving to California too, but I'll tell you this right now, Mama would have had an apoplectic. She thinks that in California they sell marijuana in produce sections of the grocery store. Maybe they do. Maybe that's why everybody wants to live there. Not me, Luann said. Not for $1 million, and I'll tell you why, too. In about another year, they're due to have the biggest earthquake in history. I read about it in some place. They say all of San Diego might just end up in the ocean, like noodle soup. I guess the sharks will be happy, I said. Taylor, I swear. These are my relatives you're talking about. Angel's relatives, I said. You're practically divorced. Not to hear them tell it, Luann said. Turtle was staring up at the wisteria flowers. Beans, she said, pointing. Bees, I said. Those things that go buzz are bees. They sting, Luann pointed out. But Turtle shook her head. Bean trees, she said, as plainly as if she had been thinking about it all day. We looked where she was pointing. Some of the wisteria flowers had gone to seed, and all these wonderful long green pods hung down from the branches. They looked as much like beans as anything you'd ever care to eat. Will you look at that? I said. It was another miracle. The flower trees were turning into bean trees. On the way home, Luann went to the corner to buy a newspaper. She was seriously job hunting now, and had applied at a couple of nursery schools, though I could just hear how Luann would ask for a job. Really, ma'am, I could understand why you wouldn't want to hire a dumb old thing such as myself. Turtle and I walked the other way, since we needed to stop in at the Lee Sing market for eggs and milk. Luann refused to set foot in there these days, saying that Lee Sing always gave her the evil eye. Luann's theory was that she was mad at her for having had Dwayne Ray instead of a girl, going against some supposedly foolproof Chinese method of prediction. My theory was that Luann suffered from the same disease as Snow Boots, feeling guilty for things beyond your wildest imagination. In any case, today Lee Sing was nowhere to be seen. She often went back to check on her famous century-old mother, the source of Mattie's purple beans, whom neither Luann nor I had ever laid eyes on, though not for lack of curiosity. According to Mattie, no one had sighted her for years, but you always had the feeling she was back there. Lee Sing had left her usual sign by the cash register. Be back 1 minute, please do not steal anything, Lee Sing. I spotted Edna Poppy in paper goods, the next aisle over from the dairy case. As best I could see, Edna was sniffing different brands of toilet tissue. Edna! Miss Poppy! I called out. When I needed to call her by name, I generally hedged my bets and used both first and last. Her head popped up and she seemed confused, looking all around. It's me, Taylor, over here. I came around into the aisle where she had parked her cart. Where's Mrs. Parsons today? I stopped dead in my tracks. Edna had a white cane. Virgie is ill in bed with a croup, I'm sorry to say. She sent me out to get fresh lemons and a drop of whiskey, and, of course, a few other unmentionables. She smiled, dropping a package of orange toilet paper into the cart. Can you tell me, dear, if these are lemons or limes I have? She ran her hand over her goods and held up a lopsided plastic bag of yellow fruits. Edna Poppy was blind. I stood for a minute staring, trying to reorganize things in my mind the way you would rearrange a roomful of furniture. Edna buying all her clothes in one color, ever since age 16, Virgie's grip on her elbow. I remembered the fantasy I'd constructed the day of our dinner party. Edna happily discovering red bobby pins in the drugstore. I'd had it completely wrong. It would have been Virgie May who found them, plucked them down off the rack of Oreo cookie barrettes, and purchased them for her friend. Are you with me, dear? I'm sorry, I said. Lemons. They're kind of small, but they look just fine. When I got home, I asked Luann if she knew. She insisted I was making the whole thing up. "Is this a joke?" she kept asking. "But if it is, it's a sick one." "It's not a joke. She had a white cane. She asked me if what she had was lemons or limes. Think about it. The way she kind of looks over your head when she talks, the way Virgie leads her around, how Virgie always says everybody's name when the two of them come into a room." Luann was horrified. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my merciful heavens, I feel about this big. When I think about all the times I've just bounced over there and said, 'See ya this, see ya that. Thanks for keeping an eye on Dwayne Ray.'" "I don't think she'd mind. Her eyes are her hands. And Virgie. She has her own special ways of keeping an eye on things," I told Luann, and this seemed to make her feel better. On Monday afternoon, I asked if it would be okay if I went up to see Esperanza. I had never been upstairs at Maddie's, and for some reason I felt it was off limits, but she said fine, to go on up. I went through the cramped study, which of course was still piled high with Maddie's dead husband's magazines. I knew by now that he had been dead many years, so it seemed unlikely that his mess would clear up any time soon, and on up the staircase into Maddie's living room. It had the same crowded, higgledy-piggledy look as the office downstairs, though the stuff here had more to do with everyday living. Junk mail, bills, pencils, magazines with color pictures of people like Tom Selleck and the President, not Jesus, a folded newspaper with half-worked crossword puzzles, the occasional pliers or screwdriver. It was the type of flotsam and jetsam, a pair of words I had just learned from the dictionary, that washes up on your coffee table, lies around for a week or so, and then makes way for whatever comes in on the next tide. Every surface was covered, tables, chairs, walls. Over the fireplace there was a big cross made up of hundreds of small, brightly glazed pieces of tile, each one shaped like something: a boy, a dog, a house, a palm tree, a bright blue fish. Together they all added up to a cross. I had never seen anything like it. The wall cross from the fireplace was covered with pictures of every imaginable size and shape. There were snapshots of people squinting into the sun, a few studio portraits of children, pictures of Maddie flanked by other people, all of them dark and shorter than herself. There were a number of children's drawings. I remembered Maddie telling me, when we'd first met, that she had something like grandchildren around. How that had struck me as such a peculiar thing to say. I noticed that practically all the kids' drawings had guns in them somewhere, and huge bullets suspended in the air, hanging on the dotted lines that flowed like waterfalls out of the gun barrels. There were many men in turtle-shaped army helmets. One picture showed a helicopter streaming blood. The living room had no windows, just doors opening off in 4 directions. An old woman came in with a cardboard box and looked at me with surprise, asking something in Spanish. I had never before seen anyone whose entire body looked sad. Her skin just seemed to hang from her, especially from her arms above the elbows and her jaw. "Esperanza," I said, and she nodded toward a door at the back. That room seemed to belong in another house. It was empty. The walls were an antique-looking shade of light pink, completely bare except for a cross with 2 palm fronds stuck behind it over one of the beds. The 2 beds were neatly made up with rough-looking blue blankets that surely no one would sleep under in this weather. Esperanza was not in either bed, but sitting up in a straight-back chair by the window. She looked up when I knocked on the door casement. "Hi, I came to see how you were doing." She got up from the chair and offered it to me. She sat on the bed. I don't believe she had been doing anything at all, just sitting with her hands in her lap. We looked at each other for a second, then looked at other things in the room, of which there were painfully few, I didn't know why I thought I'd have the nerve to do this. How are you feeling now? Are you feeling better? Your stomach's okay? I put my hand on my stomach. Esperanza nodded, then looked at her hands. I had lost my direction somewhere when I came into the house. I looked out the window expecting to see Roosevelt Park, but this was not that window. We were at the back of the house, from where you got a terrific bird's-eye view of Lee Sing's back garden. I wondered if you might catch a peek of Lee Sing's old mother from up here, if you stayed at your post long enough. I've been meaning to tell you, I said. I think Esperanza's a beautiful name. Estefan told me it means to wait, and also to hope. That in Spanish the same word means both things. But I thought it was pretty even before I knew it meant anything. It reminded me of, I don't know, a waterfall or something. She nodded. Tailor doesn't mean anything that's interesting. A tailor hems up people's pants and stuff like that. Her mouth stretched a little bit in the direction of a smile, but her eyes looked blank, dark black holes. You understand basically everything I'm saying, right? She nodded again. I think that's how Turtle is, too. But people always forget. They think she doesn't take in any more than she puts out, but I know better. I can tell she understands stuff. It's something about the way she looks at you. Esperanza kept staring at her empty hands. I wished I had something to put in them, something that would be wonderful for her to look at. I hope you don't mind me talking about Turtle. Her eyes flew up at me like a pair of blackbirds scared out of safe hiding. Estefan told me about Ismene, I said. I'm sorry. When I first found out you'd taken pills, I couldn't understand it, why you'd do such a thing to yourself, to Estefan. But when he told me that, God, how does a person live with something like that? She looked away. This conversation would have been hard enough even with two people talking. No matter what I said, it was sure to be the exact wrong thing to say to someone who recently swallowed a bottle of baby aspirin. But what would be right? Was there some book in the library where you could look up such things? I guess the main thing I came up here to tell you is, I don't know how you go on, but I really hope you'll keep doing it, that you won't give up, Esperanza. I thought of that last night. Esperanza is all you get, no second chances. What you have to do is try and think of reasons to stick it out. She had tears in her eyes, but that seemed better somehow than nothing at all. It's terrible to lose somebody, I said. I mean, I don't know firsthand, but I can imagine it must be. But it's also true that some people never have anybody to lose, and I think that's got to be so much worse. After a long time, I said, He's crazy about you. I went over and took one of the hands in her lap and held it for a second. Her skin felt cold and emptied out, like there was nobody home. As I left to go back to work, I saw the woman with the cardboard box still in the living room. She was sorting through a handful of possessions she had laid out on the sofa. A black skirt, a small book bound in red vinyl, a framed photograph, a pair of baby sneakers tied together by the laces, and carefully putting them back into the box. On Wednesday, just as I was finishing up the last patch of the day and getting ready to head for home, I spotted Luann stepping off the bus at the Roosevelt stop. I yelled for her to wait up, and she came over and talked to me while I used the water hose to wash the black dust off my hands. One thing I can tell you right now about tires, they're dirty business. Luann had just been for a job interview at a convenience store on the north side. She'd left Turtle and Dwayne Ray with Edna and Mrs. Parsons. So the first thing the guy says to me is, "We got a lot of armed robberies in here, sweetheart." He kept on calling me sweetheart and talking to my boobs instead of my face, this big flabby guy with greasy hair, and you just know he reads every one of those porno magazines they keep behind the counter. "Lots of stick-up, sweetheart. How do you hold up under pressure?" he says. Hold up. That was his idea of a big, hilarious joke. Geez, the whole thing gave me the creeps from the word go. I could see that she had dressed up for this interview. A nice skirt, iron blouse, stockings, pumps. In this heat. The humiliation of it made me furious. Something better's bound to come along, I said. You can hold out. I wiped my hands on a towel, hollered goodbye to Maddie, and we headed down the sidewalk. I hate that place, she said, nodding back over her shoulder at Fanny Heaven. Yeah, I said, but on the bright side, Maddie says they don't do a whole lot of business. She thinks having a place called Jesus is Lord right next door kind of puts a hex on it. Luann shuddered. That door's what gets me. The way they made that door handle, like a woman is something you shove on and walk right through. I try to ignore it, but it still gets me. Don't ignore it then, I said. Talk back to it. Say, you can't do that number on me, you shit for brains, or something like that. Otherwise it kind of weasels its way into your head whether you like it or not. You know those hard-boiled eggs they keep around in jars of vinegar in bars? It's like that. After a while they get to tasting awful, and it's not the egg's fault. What I'm saying is, you can't just sit there. You got to get pissed off. You really think so? I do. The thing about you, Taylor, is that you just don't let anybody put one over on you. Where'd you ever learn to be like that? Luann wanted to know. Nutter school.